Chase Thompson, thank you for the $5 super chat. He asked, "Do you think we finish with a top 10 class?" Now, I do think that this very much is going to depend on how you finish summer and how your board expands. Um, I don't think it's out of the question, but I would say you needed to land some of the guys that you missed out on to feel good about where you're trending from a top 10 class standpoint. This already wasn't going to be a big class. Clemson only takes a larger class every 3 to 4 cycles. So this was not it. 2023 was the last class that they signed up more kids. So probably won't be till this 2026 class or maybe 2027, depending on how they feel about the numbers, where they decide to take more. So I would lean towards no. But if you close with your remaining guys on the board, and if you bat 100 with those guys, which is not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, as we mentioned, I think Clemson is still very much in it for Bryce Davis. I think that's going to come down to the finish line. Jordan Young, I think Clemson is in a good position with. Dylan Alfred, you still have out there, who I think Clemson is very much trending for. Logan Anderson. And so how Clemson expands the board and who they expand the board to will very much depend on how they trend from that perspective. But I would lean towards no at this point, because you probably needed to land especially since you didn't get your top guy. If you got a David Sanders Jr., obviously things change a lot more, but it's not trending in that direction, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we probably finish out just outside the top 10, maybe top 15.
Yeah.
I don't think we ultimately end up top 10 though. So
yeah, you needed to hit on some of the guys you missed on. That's the reality. But I think I think one thing that people, when they get caught up in top 10, top 5, like there is no cutoff. There's no magical cutoff point where a top 10 class, like the 10th class and the 11th class, like there's some massive drop. Maybe there is, but in some cases, but the difference between the 10th and the 11th class and the 11th to the 15th, that varies from year to year. And that's just kind of the reality, especially when we're talking about that 10 to 25-ish range, that there's not a whole lot of separation between classes. And it really is the programs at the top. Once you get past the top 3, where there's not a whole lot of separation. So obviously your Ohio States, your Georgias, Alabama's on a heater right now. Like they're going to be there's going to be a kind of a gap there, but there's nothing about the 10th class that if it becomes the 11th, all of a sudden it's not good. And at the end of the day, I don't want to get caught up in where Clemson finishes, obviously because of how they recruit, and they just don't take as many kids as everybody else. So I think evaluating who you have in the class will ultimately determine whether this ends up being you feel good about the completeness of the class. I really like where this class sits right now, but how you finish and who you end up getting, ultimately that's how you should judge the quality of a class, not the number necessarily.
Also, getting to the number, Jordan, I just want to hit on this real quick before we move on from this question. And Chase Thompson, this is not directed at you at all. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for the question.
Absolutely.
But I've heard a lot said about Clemson's recruiting and how it's fallen off. And they like to use the NIL and transfer portal as that point in time where Clemson's recruiting fell off, right? And now we're recruiting, 12th or 13th or 15th or wherever. I implore everyone to go back, way back to maybe 2010, right? Until present time. And go look at Clemson's finishing, where Clemson's recruiting class is finished according to 247 Sports. You might see 5 or 6 top 10 classes in that entire span. So, I've heard people out there say, 2020 Clemson recruited, they had a top 3 recruiting class, and then they followed that up with a 5th ranked recruiting class, and their recruiting has just fell off. if you look at Clemson's recruiting from 2010 till present day, that top 3 and that top 5 class were anomalies.
Right.
Clemson has not consistently recruited top 5 ever. Not during the 2 national championships, not during the 6 straight playoff appearances, not during any of that time where they recruiting top 10 or top 5 consistently. Not even really top 10. They got like a top 5. They have a 3rd ranked class, a 5th ranked class, I think a 7th, a 9th. Those are the ones right off the top of my head that I can think of that were top 10 or better, right? So I think a lot of people have a skewed view. They just look at that like top 3 and top 5 class and they're like, oh, Clemson's recruiting fell apart. Clemson's recruiting the same they have the entire time Dabo Swinney's been the coach, which is top 15-ish recruiting classes. Could be 16, could be 12, somewhere in there. Could eventually, sometimes we pop into the top 10. But to say that Clemson was a consistent top 5 recruiter and suddenly we fell off with as soon as NIL and the transfer portal became a thing, it's not true. That's more misinformation. That's more, BS that's spewed out there by individuals that look at just a snapshot of Clemson and don't understand, well, we're at the exact same recruiting level we've always been. This is the same recruiting level we were at when we went on that big run where everybody, suddenly knew of Clemson and, they were an elite college football program. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I've heard it a bunch, and I don't want Clemson fans to be fooled by some of this narrative that's out there. Go back and look for yourself. Go to 247 or whatever recruiting agency and just click through the years, and you'll see Clemson is recruiting right now at about the clip they always have.
Absolutely. And so, and I think that's kind of where it gets lost. Now, I do think that obviously there has been a dip, and what doesn't get talked about enough, unless it's a Clemson fan, is you were recruiting the same, but obviously the development and the quality of the staff was in a much different place in 2016 in 2018 than it is today. Well, and I think you've done a lot to kind of correct that recently, but obviously, after 2020, 2021, like the staff was not in, the greatest shape from, just a track record standpoint, pedigree, and obviously that parlayed onto the field, and you just had a lot of misses, particularly on the offensive side of the ball at multiple positions. So, that's where things definitely needed to change. And so and obviously this season is going to be a big part on whether they can kind of reverse that course.
I completely agree. It'd be fair to say the recruiting didn't fall off, the coaching fell off.
Yeah.
And that's just being very frank about it. The development fell off. Probably for a lot of reasons.
And the injury luck. So
that too. That as well. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I think, the COVID year did a lot. And there obviously was a very big shift after that. And it coincided with the portal and NIL, but and obviously those things have played a role, but it's definitely been, you haven't had the development, the guys that you brought in that would have been successful, 5-6 years ago, were coming in and not producing, or they produced and then never built on it, and many times they regressed. So that's
NIL and transfer portal has clearly affected Clemson.
Yeah,
that's obvious. I'm just saying those are not the biggest things that went into what happened at Clemson, and that's just my opinion. But it's the easiest, low hanging fruit. It's the stuff that everybody wants to talk about instead of I think talking about what the real problems are, which is what you mentioned, Jordan, the coaching, the development, things like that. And then sometimes you miss on guys, and then you mention injuries. So there's a lot of different factors that go into it. I just don't think NIL and the transfer portal is as big of an aspect as a lot of people make it out to be.
Absolutely.
As to why Clemson is where it is right now.